Okay, imagine this. You're facing a real financial crunch. Maybe a layoff, maybe something with your health means you can't work.
Yeah, a tough spot.
Exactly. So you apply for unemployment benefits, right? You need that money, like yesterday, for essentials. Rent, food, every single day matters.
Mm-hmm.
You do everything by the book, fill out the forms, wait for that first decision, and then just silence. Nothing.
The waiting game, it's brutal.
And maybe you appeal, but the hearing, it just gets pushed back indefinitely. It's not like they're saying no, they're just dragging it out. You feel trapped in this bureaucratic maze while, life keeps happening.
That specific feeling, yeah, just watching the days tick by while this crucial decision hangs in the balance is incredibly stressful. And it's a real systemic problem, this administrative delay.
Right.
And the really insidious part is that in some places, trying to fight that delay itself was, well, legally impossible. Until pretty recently, anyway.
That feeling of being completely stuck, totally powerless against the system. That's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We're looking at a really significant Supreme Court decision from February 2025.
Williams v. Reed, case number 23-191.
That's the one. It tackles this bureaucratic chokehold head on.
So our mission today is to unpack this ruling, cut through the legalese. We're using the official Supreme Court syllabus and the full opinion as our guides.
And we're digging into a fundamental question that honestly affects anyone who might need state help. Can a state basically set up a rule, a procedural hoop, that makes it impossible to challenge them when they're just taking too long, especially when your federal rights are on the line?
Rights like due process, for example.
Exactly. And the court, they just give a pretty definitive answer. It really sets a boundary on state power when federal rights are involved. It's a big deal for accountability.
Definitely. And to really grasp the weight of it, we got to start with people who brought the case, the petitioners.
Who were they?
They were unemployed workers in Alabama, trying to get state unemployment benefits. And their core complaint, this is key, wasn't really about whether they deserved the benefits in the end.
Oh, right. It wasn't about the final yes or no.
No. It was about the delay. The unreasonable, unlawful time it took to get any decision, good or bad, from the Alabama Department of Labor, which is now called the Department of Workforce, by the way.
And these aren't minor delays we're talking about. They have real consequences. The source material gives examples, like one plaintiff, Derek Bateman.
Yeah, his situation was stark. He filed his appeal, right, to the administrative tribunal. But the department, according to his claim, just never scheduled a hearing, never acted on it, despite him following up constantly, emails, phone calls.
Stuck, completely stalled.
Functionally stuck, yeah. That inability to get the process moving is the injury they were fighting. So these claimants, 21 of them, I think, sued the Secretary of Labor.
Okay, and what were they asking the court to do? Not just give them the money, you said.
Correct. They weren't asking the judge to decide their benefits claim. They wanted something else, a court order, something to force the department to actually act promptly.
And they used a specific federal law to do this, right? Section 1983. That comes up a lot.
It does. 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. You can think of it as, well, a crucial tool for individuals. It's the law that lets you sue state officials if they violate your federal rights.
Like your constitutional rights, due process.
Exactly, like the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Or sometimes specific rights laid out in federal laws, like parts of the Social Security Act that actually require state systems to operate, promptly.
So they wanted a federal court to basically tell the state agency, hey, you need to follow some rules here, be timely.
Precisely. They were seeking what's called injunctive relief. That's the legal term for a court order demanding action, or sometimes stopping action. Here, they wanted an order forcing the department to stick to actual timelines.
And they had specific timelines in mind.
They did, and it shows the urgency. They asked the court to order the department to make those initial non-monetary decisions within 10 days.
Okay.
To schedule appeal hearings within 10 days of request, and hold them no later than 90 days after that request.
That seems reasonable.
And importantly, to pay out approved claims within just 2 days of approval. They wanted efficiency enforced by the court.
Okay. Seems straightforward enough,
Yep.
but it wasn't. The state courts shut them down.
Completely. The state trial court dismissed the lawsuit, and the Alabama Supreme Court agreed. And the reason they gave, this is where the trap snapped shut, they said the workers didn't follow Alabama's strict administrative exhaustion requirement.
Administrative exhaustion. Sounds like you have to finish the whole bureaucratic process first.
Exactly. It's found in the Alabama Code, Section 25-495.
Yeah.
And this is the legal quicksand the Supreme Court really zeroed in on, the catch-22.
Right, explain that catch-22.
The Alabama courts essentially said, you cannot use this federal civil rights law, Section 1983, to challenge how slow we are until you've gone through our entire slow process.
But wait, if I finally do get through the whole process, maybe months or even years later, isn't my complaint about the delay itself kind of pointless then?
Precisely. It becomes moot, legally speaking. The delay happened, it might have caused harm, but the process is over. So the very rule designed to handle your benefits claim was being used to block you from ever challenging the slowness of that process.
Wow, so the rule effectively gave state officials immunity from being sued for dragging their feet.
That's exactly how the Supreme Court saw it. It created an effective immunity against this specific kind of federal lawsuit. It's like telling someone they can't complain about a fire starting late until after the whole building is burned down.
Yeah, that makes the federal right pretty meaningless in practice.
Utterly meaningless for challenging delay. And that leads us right into how the U.S. Supreme Court dismantled this paradox. They used a core constitutional principle, federal preemption.
Preemption. Okay. Sounds technical but important.
Right.
Why did federal law need to step in here? What does preemption mean in this context?
Well, at its heart, it's about the supremacy clause of the Constitution. Federal laws passed by Congress are the supreme law of the land. States generally can't pass laws that conflict with federal law or undermine federal rights.
Okay.
So the Supreme Court, in this 5-4 decision written by Justice Kavanaugh, agreed with the workers. They ruled that the state's exhaustion rule, at least how it was applied in this situation, violated federal law.
So the state tried to build this kind of protective wall around its officials using its own procedures to block a federal lawsuit. And the Supreme Court said, nope, can't do that.
That's the essence of it. They relied heavily on a really important precedent, a case called Felder v. Casey.
Felder v. Casey. What did that establish?
Felder basically said that a state law cannot immunize government actions that would otherwise be subject to a lawsuit under Section 1983. Even if the lawsuit is happening in a state court, states can't just create procedural hurdles that effectively act as an immunity defense against federal civil rights claims.
And the court found other examples of states trying similar things. It wasn't a brand new issue.
Oh, definitely not new. The opinion points to other cases where the court struck down state rules that tried to shield officials or entities from Section 1983 liability.
Like what?
Well, there was Howlett v. Rose. In that case, Florida tried to extend its sovereign immunity to cover municipalities, essentially blocking certain Section 1983 claims against them. The court preempted that rule.
Okay.
And then there's Haywood v. Drown. New York passed a law trying to shield state correction officers from specific damages claims brought by prisoners under Section 1983.
And the court struck that down too.
Yes. And the language the court used in Haywood is really telling, and it came up again here. They called the New York law an immunity statute cloaked in jurisdictional garb.
Cloaked in jurisdictional garb. That sounds like a disguise, like they were trying to hide what the rule really did.
Pretty much. It means the state labeled the rule as something neutral sounding, like it just defined which court could hear which case. That's jurisdiction. But its actual function, its real-world effect, was to grant immunity.
Function over form.
Exactly. And the majority in Williams v. Reed said Alabama's exhaustion rule, when used against these delay claims seeking injunctive relief, did the same thing. It might be called an exhaustion rule, but it functioned as immunity. And under federal law, that's not allowed.
That focus on the practical effect rather than just the label seems key. But Alabama must have pushed back, right? What were their arguments for why their rule was different?
They had two main lines of defense. First, they really insisted that their rule was truly jurisdictional, not just some procedural trick.
How so?
They argued it was a fundamental rule about the power of Alabama courts, defining what those courts were allowed to hear in the first place, not just how they should handle cases.
Still trying to rely on that jurisdictional label.
Right, but the court basically said, we don't really care what label you put on it. If the rule's practical effect is to immunize state officials from federal claims, then calling it jurisdictional doesn't save it. You can't use state labels to undermine a federal remedy.
Makes sense. Function over label again? What was their second argument?
They suggested the workers weren't actually trapped. They argued there was another way out. The workers could have sought something called a writ of mandamus in state court.
Mandamus? That's a court order telling an official to do their job, right?
Essentially, yes. A court order compelling a government official to perform a duty they are legally required to perform. So the state was saying, look, you didn't need to file a federal Section 1983 lawsuit to make us hurry up. You could have just asked an Alabama court for a writ of mandamus.
Okay, seems plausible on the surface. Why didn't the Supreme Court buy that?
for two main reasons, and they're pretty revealing. First, the court noted it wasn't even clear if mandamus was actually available for these kinds of unemployment delay cases in Alabama. The Alabama Supreme Court itself hadn't said it was a proper path.
If the state's own top court didn't point to it as an option, that seems unlikely to be a real alternative.
Right. And the second reason was even more direct. The court said even if mandamus was theoretically available, telling plaintiffs they have to pursue that first before they can file their Section 1983 claim. That's just administrative exhaustion by another name.
So it's just another hoop to jump through before you get to the federal claim.
Exactly. It still forces the plaintiff to go through a state-mandated preliminary step before bringing the federal challenge to the delay. It's basically replacing one type of procedural barrier that creates immunity with a slightly different procedural barrier that still creates immunity from the Section 1983 suit about the delay itself. It still defeats the purpose.
So call it exhaustion, call it mandamus first. The result was the same. The officials were shielded from the delay claim. The court just cut through all that.
That's the core takeaway from the majority. The practical reality for the person trying to assert their federal rights is what matters, not the labels the state uses. If the state process blocks the federal remedy, the state process gets preempted in that context.
Okay, but we definitely need to mention the split. This was 5-4, that's close. It tells you there was some serious disagreement on the court. Justice Thomas wrote the dissent, right, joined by 3 others. What was their side of the story?
Yeah, the dissent really emphasized state sovereignty and the traditional power of states over their own court systems. They talked about the plenary authority of states.
Plenary authority, meaning like the complete power states have to set up and run their own courts.
Exactly. Their fundamental right to organize their judicial branch, including setting rules about who can sue, when, and how. The dissent felt the majority was stepping on the state's toes here, interfering with that traditional authority.
So they saw this Alabama rule differently, not as some kind of scheme to block federal rights.
Right. The dissent viewed it as a long-standing, neutral jurisdictional rule. Not something cooked up specifically to stop Section 1983 claims, but a general rule designed for efficiency. Letting the agency handle things first, using its expertise.
Okay.
They were worried that the majority was focusing too much on the effect of the rule, that it happened to block these specific delay claims, instead of its neutral purpose. They argued this could lead to federal courts constantly second-guessing all sorts of neutral state court rules just because they might occasionally impact a federal claim.
That's a classic federalism debate, isn't it? Where does state power end and federal power begin? The majority focused on the outcome for the individual's federal rights. The dissent focused on the state's traditional power and the rule's neutral intent.
It really is. But it's crucial to note, the majority itself stressed how narrow their ruling was.
Oh, that's important. They weren't throwing out all state administrative rules.
No, not at all. They made it clear they weren't invalidating Alabama's entire benefit system or saying states can never require administrative exhaustion. They were only addressing the very specific catch-22 created when this exhaustion rule was applied to claims that were challenging the delay itself.
Okay, that's a really critical point for anyone listening. This decision doesn't mean you can just sue the government the second your paperwork seems slow.
Definitely not.
What it does mean is that the state can't legally use its own procedures to completely block you from bringing a federal lawsuit that argues the delay has become unconstitutional or violates federal law simply by forcing you to wait until that very process is over.
Exactly. It secures the forum. It makes sure you can get into court to make that argument about delay. It stops bureaucratic foot-dragging from becoming its own impenetrable shield against accountability.
So let's boil this down. The practical takeaway for you, the listener, maybe dealing with unemployment or other state benefits that are supposed to be timely. What does Williams v. Reed actually mean for you on the ground?
It means that your fundamental right to have the government act in a timely manner, especially when federal law requires it, has been affirmed. The pathway to hold state agencies accountable for really unreasonable delays is clearer now.
So the agency can't say, sorry, finish our entire slow process first, then you can sue us for being too slow.
That specific argument is off the table now for these kinds of delay claims seeking injunctive relief. The decision secures the availability of that Section 1983 remedy to force action. It gives you a tool to potentially seek a court order, compelling the agency to move.
So it's really about the timing of when you can demand accountability.
Precisely. The court ensured that if a state is supposed to act promptly under federal law, You actually get your day in court to argue about what promptly means and whether the agency has crossed that line.
Now, they still have to prove their case, right? The claimants in Williams didn't automatically win their benefits or prove the delay was unconstitutional just because of this ruling?
Oh, absolutely. They still have the burden of proving that the delay they experienced actually violated due process or specific federal statutes. That's the next stage. But the huge victory here is that they now have the right to make that argument before a judge instead of being turned away at the courthouse door because of that exhaustion rule.
Right, the door is open now, and that actually leads perfectly into the final thought we wanted to leave you with. Something to chew on.
Okay.
Now that this specific catch-22 is resolved, now that people can sue over unreasonable delays without waiting for the process to end, what's the next legal battleground? It seems like it shifts the focus, right? It's no longer if you can sue over delay, but when does delay become bad enough to be illegal? Where is that line? How many weeks, how many months does it take for promptly to become an unconstitutional delay?
That's a fascinating question. How will courts define that threshold? And how will state agencies maybe adjust their internal processes now, knowing this federal lawsuit is a real possibility much earlier in the game?
Exactly. Defining that line seems like the critical next step that this ruling really opens up for people needing benefits across the country.
A real test for government efficiency and accountability, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, that is all the time we have for this deep dive into Williams v. Reed. Thanks so much for joining us as we unpack this really important ruling.